So there's a lot of talk about lesser of two evils, and I wanted to extend that conversation a little bit. If you had to pick a lesser of two evils between, say, Saddam Hussein and Henry Kissinger, who would you pick? And what I think is there's a really obvious, easy answer to this, and I think some of you would have to think about it, and that worries me. I made a post about this, and people took it to mean that I was like simping for some like Nepo baby like intelligence asset. Like, absolutely not. What I was trying to say is that we have a way of cartoonizing the evil of brown people in foreign lands and ignoring the deep, abiding, and much clearly much worse on every measurable level evil that comes from the people in our own country. And that comes from liberals and conservatives too, right? It's not just a like blue or red thing. It's that anybody who's not from here, especially if they are black or brown, that led another country, Thomas Sankara, people in this country probably would think that he was some kind of bad person because that's all they've heard about him from our media and from even our historians. Look, America's the bad guy in basically every conflict, and a willingness to listen to some of the historical villains is not in any way siding with them or anyone. Like, Malcolm X is one of my personal heroes and always will be, but would we have been able to have a productive conversation about gender or about like black nationalism? Probably not. But the thing that he said, I'm for the truth, whoever's telling it, that basically is about erasing narrative control of the overculture. And also, stop making cartoonish caricatures of evil or goodness of basically anyone. But be especially wary of who this country tells you is irredeemably evil, because usually, almost always, that's a run up for them doing something to that person or people that look like that person. Giving a loyalty oath and refusing to acknowledge that anyone in the world might have said something useful is part of how they control even those of us who should know better. And I think after the past month plus of all of us who are like to the left of Bernie Sanders being asked if we condemn you know who, like as a precondition of even having a conversation, like it's all about just getting everybody in lockstep. And that gets you to never ever listen to certain people because you assume that they have absolutely nothing good to add to the conversation and that they are just enemies. They're people who are dispensable, essentially. And that's the first step of dehumanization. That's the first step in the run up to war. And I'm going to say something that I always say: only kings want war. The average person has to be convinced to go to war. I'm not a pacifist. I'm not talking about fighting. People would scrap all the time, and maybe more often than they do if there weren't like police around, right? But it would just be like people might fight and then be fine because that's the thing that usually happens. But war is something totally different. War requires a meticulous dehumanization and a complete factionalization into our group and their group, and whatever happens to their group is completely acceptable. And part of the way that starts is by telling you that particular people, particular leaders, are just so cartoonishly evil that nothing they ever say or do could ever possibly have any merit. And that's just not true. And what is even more true is that the leaders on our side, not even just the leaders, like there's lots of people in our country who are essentially that cartoonishly evil. Like they have done so many things that are egregious beyond the pale that we should look at them as the world's greatest evils that have ever existed. But they're never the people who people list when they say you should never ever listen to anything that person said. I think that I would never read a book by Henry Kissinger because I think he is more responsible for harm, evil, and with like, actual numbers to it, right? Than basically any of the baddies who we have been taught are like the tremendous, scary dictators in the world because he's in this country and this country has more power. And we have military bases everywhere. And we have an intelligence apparatus that has shown it will do anything to any country that it wants to if it is in service of maintaining American hegemony. So if I say that someone said one good thing, that's literally what I mean. And if you're trying to extrapolate that I respect that person or that I support that person, that's a you problem. That's not a me problem. That means they have gotten to your brain to the point where you immediately turn everything into a black or white issue. And that's not how the world works.